Don't cry, darling. I know this is sudden, but I want you to be my wife.
Oh, yes. Yes, I will.
The wind howled through the Montana plains, carrying whispers of a heavy-set woman who sought refuge at a desolate ranch, and the scarred man who took her in. They said she was only there to cook, but fate and a deadly secret had a far more dangerous recipe in mind. The year was 1887, and the Bitterroot Valley was unforgiving to anyone who lacked the iron to withstand it. The buckboard wagon rattled over the rutted trail, sending plumes of chalky dust into the sweltering afternoon air. In the back sat Josephine Caldwell. She was 26 years old, unwed, and carried a physical weight that most of polite society in Chicago had deemed an unpardonable sin. Josie was an obese woman, a fact that had drawn cruel whispers, mocking stares, and absolute isolation her entire life. Yet beneath the heavy layers of her woolen traveling dress and the physical bulk she bore, she possessed a quiet, unyielding resilience. She gripped the handles of her battered carpetbag as the wagon finally lurched to a halt in front of the Broken Ridge Ranch. It was a bleak, sprawling property that looked as lonely as the man who owned it. The main house was built of sturdy, weathered timber, but the porch was sagging, and the windows were caked with prairie grime. "This is it, miss," the stage driver muttered, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Montgomery's place. You sure about this? He ain't exactly known for his hospitality." "I am sure." "Thank you, Mr. Higgins," Josie replied, her voice soft but steady. With significant effort, she climbed down from the high seat, her boots hitting the dry earth with a heavy thud. She paid the driver her last few silver coins and watched the wagon disappear, taking her final lifeline back to civilization with it. The screen door of the cabin groaned open. Out stepped Wyatt Montgomery. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man whose face looked as though it had been carved from the very granite of the surrounding mountains. A deep scar slashed through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a rusted barbed wire fence, and his eyes were a piercing, icy blue. He stood leaning heavily on a wooden cane, favoring his right leg. Wyatt stared of men standing in his yard. He had posted a notice in the Bozeman Ledger for a cook and housekeeper, expecting a sturdy, hardened widow or a young Irish immigrant desperate for coin. He had not expected a woman of Josie's size, trembling slightly in the summer heat, her face flushed red beneath her simple bonnet. "You the one who answered the advertisement?" Wyatt asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the dry air. "I am," Josie said, squaring her shoulders, refusing to shrink under his intense gaze. "My name is Josephine Caldwell. I am here to cook." Wyatt limped down the porch steps, his eyes sweeping over her form with a blunt, assessing scrutiny that made Josie's cheeks burn hotter. "Miss Caldwell, I'll be plain with you. The work here is brutal. I run 3,000 head of cattle with only 4 ranch hands. We eat early, we eat late, and the stove runs hot all day. I need someone who can keep up, not someone who's going to faint when the sweat starts pouring." Josie lifted her chin. She had heard it all before, the assumptions that her weight equated to laziness, to fragility. "Mr. Montgomery, I traveled over 1,000 miles to get here. I did not survive the journey to faint in your kitchen. Point me to the stove, show me the larder, and judge me by the food on your table, not the width of my waist." A flicker of surprise, and perhaps a grudging ounce of respect, crossed Wyatt's stoic features. He didn't smile, but he gave a curt nod. "Kitchen's in the back. Larders stocked with flour, salt pork, beans, and a few dozen eggs. Supper is at sundown." Josie did not waste a second. She carried her heavy bag into the small room adjacent to the kitchen, rolling up her sleeves the moment she dropped it on the narrow cot. The kitchen was an outright disaster. Soot stained the ceiling, dirty cast-iron skillets were piled high, and a thick layer of grease coated the wooden prep table. She tied a canvas apron around her waist and got to work. Her body ached, her joints protesting the heavy labor, but she moved with a practiced, rhythmic efficiency. Josie had spent her entire life hiding in the kitchens of her wealthy, cruel stepbrother's estate, finding solace only in the alchemy of yeast, flour, fire, and spice. By the time the sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the mountains, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley, the ranch hands tramped toward the house. They were exhausted, filthy men who expected the usual charred bacon and flavorless mush Wyatt had been serving since his previous cook fled back east. Instead, they walked into a wall of aroma that stopped them dead in their tracks. The dining table was scrubbed raw and set with care. In the center sat a massive, steaming Dutch oven filled with a rich beef and root vegetable stew. The broth thickened and dark, seasoned with wild thyme Josie had found growing near the porch. Beside it was a mountain of golden, fluffy buttermilk biscuits, their tops glistening with melted butter, and a deep-dish apple cobbler bubbling with cinnamon and brown sugar. Ezekiel, an older ranch hand with a graying beard, took off his hat and stared. "Lord Almighty, did I die and go to glory?" Wyatt took his seat at the head of the table. He looked from the feast to Josie, who stood quietly near the stove, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron, her chest heaving slightly from the exertion. "Sit down and eat," Wyatt ordered the men. The silence that followed was broken only by the clatter of silverware and the groans of profound satisfaction. The men ate like starving wolves, but Wyatt ate deliberately, savoring the complex, hearty flavors. It was the best meal he had tasted in a decade. When the plates were scraped clean, Wyatt looked up at Josie. "Breakfast is at 5, he said simply. For Wyatt Montgomery, it was the highest form of praise. As the weeks bled into a grueling but rhythmic routine, Josie transformed the Broken Ridge Ranch. Her weight made her movements slower than a leaner woman's, and the punishing heat of the kitchen often left her drenched in sweat, but she never complained. She hauled water, scrubbed floors, and turned meager rations into feasts. Wyatt found himself watching her. At first it was out of suspicion, waiting for her to break under the pressure. But as time passed, his observations shifted. He noticed how gentle she was with the stray barn cats, how her laughter, a rich, throaty sound, could make even the hardest ranch hand crack a smile. He noticed how she favored her left knee on rainy days, yet still managed to knead dough for an hour straight. More importantly, Wyatt realized that the crushing, suffocating loneliness that had plagued him for years was beginning to lift. He began lingering in the kitchen after supper, nursing a cup of black coffee while Josie washed the dishes. They rarely spoke at first, sharing a companionable silence. But soon the quiet gave way to brief, tentative conversations. He learned that she loved to read, that she had a mind sharp as a tack, and that she possessed a deep, hidden sorrow in her eyes that mirrored his own. Josie, in turn, learned that Wyatt's harsh exterior was a fortress built to protect a man who had lost everything, his parents to cholera, his younger brother to the Civil War, and his ability to walk without pain to a frightened Mustang. But the peace they were building was fragile, and the outside world was closing in. The turning point came on a sweltering Tuesday in late August, during a necessary trip to the town of Oakhaven for supplies. Wyatt drove the wagon, with Josie sitting beside him. She wore her best dress, a muted navy blue cotton that did little to hide her bulk, but she had painstakingly braided her thick chestnut hair and pinned it neatly. Oakhaven was a bustling frontier town, teeming with prospectors, cattlemen, and the self-appointed high society of the West. As Wyatt and Josie walked along the boardwalk toward the general store, the murmurs began. Josie kept her eyes fixed on the wooden planks, her cheeks burning as she heard the barely concealed giggles of a group of women standing outside the millinery. "Good heavens, look at the size of her," one whispered loudly. "She must eat a whole cow a day." "I hear Wyatt Montgomery hired her," another replied. a wealthy, sharp-featured widow named Loretta Jenkins. Loretta had spent the last 2 years aggressively pursuing Wyatt and his vast land holdings, only to be coldly rejected. I suppose when a man is that desperate, he'll take whatever massive beast wanders onto his property. He's probably going bankrupt just feeding her. Josie's breath hitched. The old, familiar shame, the suffocating feeling of being a monstrous spectacle clawed at her throat. She quickened her pace, desperate to reach the sanctuary of the store, but she stumbled on a loose board. Before she could fall, a strong, calloused hand gripped her arm, steadying her. Wyatt didn't let go. Instead, he stopped dead in the middle of the boardwalk, pulling Josie gently to his side. He turned his terrifying, icy gaze toward Loretta Jenkins and her sycophants. The air in the street seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mrs. Jenkins," Wyatt's voice carried over the dusty street, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'd ask you to mind your manners, but it's clear you ain't got any." Miss Caldwell is a woman of exceptional character and talent, 2 things you severely lack. If I ever hear you or anyone else utter a word against her again, I'll pull my accounts from your brother's bank by noon. Loretta's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like a landed trout. The other women quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by the storefront windows. Wyatt turned back to Josie, his grip on her arm loosening into a surprisingly gentle hold. "Come along, Josie. We have supplies to buy." It was the first time he had used her first name. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but the air between them hummed with a new electric tension. Josie stared out at the rolling golden hills, her heart pounding against her ribs. No one, in her 26 years of life, had ever stood up for her. No one had ever shielded her from the cruelty of the world. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered finally, not looking at him. "I'm used to it, Mr. Montgomery. My size. It offends people. It always has." Wyatt brought the horses to a halt in the middle of the empty trail. He turned to her, his jaw set. "Your size doesn't offend me, Josie. What offends me is cruelty. What offends me is people who can't see the worth of a person because they're too blinded by their own shallow vanity." He paused, his voice dropping softer. "You have brought life back into my home. You are the best thing that's happened to that ranch in a long time." Tears pricked Josie's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't let him be kind to her. If he was kind, she would fall in love with him. And a man like Wyatt Montgomery would never truly want a woman like her. But the warmth of his defense was quickly overshadowed by a dark cloud gathering on the horizon. 3 days later, Ezekiel returned from a solo trip to Oakhaven with grim news. He cornered Wyatt in the barn while Josie was inside baking bread. "Boss, there's trouble," Ezekiel said, pulling off his hat and wiping his brow. "There's a stranger in town, wears a bowler hat, talks with a fancy Chicago accent. He's asking around for a large woman. Says she stole something valuable from her family, and he's been hired to bring her back. He's flashing a lot of money and a Pinkerton badge." Wyatt's blood ran cold. He knew Josie hadn't stolen anything. He knew the soul of the woman sleeping under his roof. That evening, Wyatt confronted Josie in the kitchen. The sun had set, and the only light came from the flickering kerosene lamp on the table. He told her what Ezekiel had seen. The color vanished from Josie's face. The heavy wooden spoon in her hand slipped, clattering loudly to the floor. She gripped the edge of the table, her whole body trembling as the walls of her past closed in. "He found me," she gasped, her voice breaking. "Nathaniel found me." "Who is Nathaniel?" Wyatt demanded, stepping closer. Josie broke down, the agonizing truth spilling from her lips. Nathaniel was her cruel stepbrother. When her father died, he had left a sizable inheritance in trust for Josie, accessible only when she married or turned 27. Nathaniel had spent years trying to force her to sign the rights over to him, keeping her locked away, mocking her weight, feeding her scraps of dignity. When she refused to sign, he threatened to have her committed to an asylum. "I ran away," Josie sobbed, tears cutting tracks through the flour on her cheeks. I took a train west with what little money I had secretly saved. I didn't steal anything, Wyatt. It's my money. But he has the law in his pocket. If they take me back, he'll lock me away in a madhouse. He'll destroy me. She turned frantically toward the back room. I have to leave. If I stay, they'll bring the law to your door. I won't let them ruin you. I'll pack my bag tonight. Stop, Wyatt commanded. Josie ignored him, shoving past him into her small room, pulling her battered carpet bag from under the cot. She was throwing her few dresses inside when Wyatt filled the doorway, his broad frame blocking any chance of escape. I said, "Stop, Josie," he repeated, stepping into the room and gently but firmly taking the bag from her shaking hands. He tossed it into the corner. "Wyatt, you don't understand," she cried, looking up at him with terrified, tear-filled eyes. "He is a ruthless man. A Pinkerton agent won't care about the truth. They will drag me back in chains." "Let them try," Wyatt growled, a lethal edge in his voice that sent a shiver down her spine. "I've fought off cattle, rustlers, blizzards, and wolves. I ain't about to be scared off by some city boy detective in a bowler hat. They have legal rights to take me." Josie pleaded, her chest heaving. "I am an unwed woman under my stepbrother's guardianship until I turn 27. I have no legal standing, no protection. The law is on his side." Wyatt stared at her, his mind racing. The frontier laws were tricky, but there was one ironclad rule that superseded a guardian's claim in the territory: a husband's authority. He took a slow step toward her. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by a fierce, blazing determination. He reached out, his rough, scarred hands gently cupping her tear-stained face. Josie froze, her breath catching in her throat at the intimate contact. "You need legal protection," Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that seemed to echo in the quiet room. "You need a wall between you and that bastard stepbrother of yours. A wall he can't climb over." "Wyatt, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you aren't leaving this ranch," Wyatt said firmly, his thumbs gently wiping the tears from her cheeks. "I'm asking you to stay, Josie, but not as my cook." Josie's heart stopped. She stared into his icy blue eyes, searching for pity, for a cruel joke, but found only steadfast sincerity. "Stay as my wife," Wyatt proposed, the words hanging in the air like a struck match. "Marry me tomorrow morning. Once you bear the name Montgomery, you are my wife, and no Pinkerton, no stepbrother, and no lawmen in this country can drag you off my land without going through me first." Josie stared at Wyatt, the magnitude of his proposal ringing in the silent kitchen. "Marry him." The man with ice in his eyes and fire in his soul. "You cannot mean this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "A marriage? To save me? I cannot ask you to ruin your life by shackling yourself to me." Wyatt did not flinch. "Josie, look at me. Do I look like a man who does anything he doesn't want to do? There is no pity here. I need a partner. This ranch needs a heart. And I need you." The sincerity in his gravelly voice broke the last of her defenses. She wept against his chest, feeling his strong arms wrap around her heavy frame, holding her with a fierce possessiveness she had never known. By dawn, the buckboard wagon was hitched. Wyatt wore his only clean suit, the dark wool brushing against his worn holster. Josie wore her navy cotton dress, a borrowed lace shawl draped over her broad shoulders. They rode into Oakhaven as the morning mist burned off the valley floor. Judge Harrison, a pragmatic man who owed Wyatt a debt from a winter cattle rustling incident, met them in his dusty office. But as the judge opened his ledger, the heavy oak door swung open. In stepped a man in a sharp bowler hat, his suit immaculately tailored against the frontier dust. He sneered, his eyes locking on to Josie. "Josephine Caldwell," the Pinkerton detective drawled. "I am Agent Miller. On behalf of your guardian, Nathaniel, I am here to escort you back to Chicago. You are legally bound to his wardship." Josie's blood froze. She shrank back, but Wyatt stepped squarely in front of her, a shield of muscle and fury. "You're interrupting a private ceremony, Miller," Wyatt said, his hand resting casually on the butt of his Colt revolver. "Take off your hat, or I'll shoot it off." Agent Miller smirked, though his eyes darted to the gun. "She is no lady, Montgomery. She is a runaway ward. The law dictates she comes with me." "The law dictates she is a free woman once married," Wyatt countered. He looked over his shoulder at the judge. "Read the vows, Harrison, now." The judge cleared his throat, reading the vows with blistering speed. Miller stepped forward, reaching into his coat. "I have a warrant." The metallic click of Wyatt's revolver cocking echoed in the small room. He didn't draw, just thumbed the hammer back in its holster. "One more step, and you won't leave Oak Haven breathing." Miller froze. He was a city detective, used to intimidating frightened women, not facing down hardened frontiersmen. "Do you, Josephine Caldwell, take this man?" the judge rushed. "I do," Josie gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Do you, Wyatt Montgomery, take this woman?" "I do," Wyatt said, never taking his eyes off Miller. "By the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you man and wife. Sign the ledger." Josie grabbed the pen, her hand shaking as she scrawled her name. Wyatt signed with sharp, definitive strokes. He turned to Miller, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "She is Josephine Montgomery now. Go back to Chicago. Tell Nathaniel if he ever sets foot in Montana, I will bury him under the broken ridge." Agent Miller backed away very slowly, his face flushed with rage. "This is not over, Montgomery. Nathaniel won't let her inheritance go this easily." As the oak door slammed shut, Wyatt turned to his new wife. He cupped her cheek, pressing a gentle, lingering kiss to her lips. It tasted of dust, fear, and a burning, undeniable promise. The first few weeks of their marriage passed in a hazy, beautiful transition. What began as a desperate shield evolved into a profound, consuming romance. Wyatt treated Josie with a reverence she had never experienced. In the quiet darkness of their bedroom, there was no shame, no hiding. He worshipped the curves she had been taught to loathe, tracing the soft lines of her body with calloused fingers, whispering words of fierce devotion against her skin. For the first time in her 26 years, Josephine felt beautiful. She was the undisputed queen of the broken ridge, but the shadow of Chicago still loomed over them. A frigid November blizzard soon hit the valley. Ezekiel had ridden out, leaving only Wyatt and Josie. While pulling cornbread from the oven, Josie heard frantic barking. She peered out the window. 3 riders were approaching through the driving snow. In the center, bundled in an expensive fur coat that looked absurd against the rugged landscape, was Nathaniel. Agent Miller rode beside him, along with a hired gun whose face was hidden beneath a low-brimmed hat. Panic seized Josie's throat, but it was quickly swallowed by a surge of territorial fury. This was her home. She was no longer a frightened girl locked in a Chicago mansion. She was Josephine Montgomery. Wyatt was already on the porch, his Winchester rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He had seen them coming. "Nathaniel," Wyatt called out, his voice cutting through the howling wind. "You're trespassing. Turn around." Nathaniel halted his horse at the edge of the yard, his aristocratic face twisted in disgust as he surveyed the weathered ranch. "I have not traveled across the country to be dismissed by a crippled cowpoke. I have federal papers overturning this sham marriage. Josephine is mentally unfit. I am taking her back." Josie stepped out onto the porch, the cold stinging her face. She stood beside Wyatt, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She stood tall, refusing to cower. "I am not going anywhere with you, Nathaniel. I am of sound mind, and I am exactly where I belong." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed with venomous hatred. "You fat, ungrateful sow. You think this dirt farmer actually wants you? He wants your inheritance. "Miller, grab her!" The hired gun reached for his holster, but Wyatt was faster. A deafening crack echoed across the snow as Wyatt fired a warning shot, blowing the hat off the hired gun's head. "Next one goes between your eyes," Wyatt roared. Suddenly, Miller drew his pistol and fired. The bullet splintered the wooden post mere inches from Josie's head. Wyatt shoved Josie back through the front door, shouting for her to stay down before returning fire. A chaotic shootout erupted. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and the smell of sulfur filled the frigid air. Wyatt took cover behind the thick porch railing, laying down suppressive fire. Inside, Josie did not hide. She crawled across the floorboards to Wyatt's desk, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She pulled open the bottom drawer and retrieved his spare double-barreled shotgun. She knew how to load it. Wyatt had insisted on teaching her just 2 weeks prior. Her hands shook as she shoved the heavy brass shells into the breech, snapping it shut with a satisfying click. Outside, Wyatt groaned. A bullet had grazed his left shoulder, spinning him backward onto the porch floor. Nathaniel spurred his horse forward, sensing the momentary weakness, drawing his own silver-plated derringer. "I'll kill him and drag you back by your hair," he screamed over the gunfire. Josie kicked the front door wide open. She stepped out into the blizzard, the heavy shotgun raised to her shoulder. Her large frame filled the doorway, an imposing force of nature. Nathaniel sneered and leveled his small gun at her. "Get off my land!" Josie roared, pulling both triggers. The recoil knocked her back a step, but the blast was devastating. A spray of buckshot shredded the snow and dirt directly in front of Nathaniel's horse. The terrified animal reared up, violently bucking Nathaniel from the saddle. He crashed into the frozen mud with a sickening crack, screaming as his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Miller surrendered. Wyatt clutched his bleeding shoulder, staring in pure awe. Josie stood over her sniveling stepbrother. "Sign the papers releasing my trust," she said coldly. Days later, the transfer was complete. That evening, inside their warm kitchen, Wyatt pulled his wife close. She was Josephine Montgomery, the beloved, fierce protector of the Broken Ridge Ranch, reigning fiercely forever. Did you enjoy this thrilling tale of romance, courage, and frontier justice? Josephine's journey from outcast to fierce protector of the Broken Ridge Ranch proves true strength and beauty come from within. If this Wild West drama captivated your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Do not forget to share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories. Hit the notification bell today to catch every new epic video upload.